This is Chapter 8, Intentional Torts and Business Torts for Business Law. So to start, let's talk about what exactly is a tort. And so a tort is a violation of a duty imposed by the civil law. An example being, let's say a surgeon's operating on you. They remove your kidney, but they were supposed to be performing an operation on your heart. This is considered negligence. In order to understand tort law, let's compare it with criminal law and contract law. Remember, contract law will be something we cover next week. So in contract law, we abbreviate the word contract with the letter K. So the parties agree on a contract which creates a mutual duty. The plaintiff sues, and if the plaintiff wins, they win dollar damages. In tort law, civil law imposes duties of conduct on all persons. The plaintiff sues, and they're awarded dollar damages for the misconduct. Criminal law prohibits conduct. There's prosecution by the government, and the punishment is a combination of either prison and or fine. So what are intentional torts? So intentional torts are harm caused by a deliberate action. And an example would be if John hits Sally, this is an intentional tort of battery. Now let's talk about the types of intentional torts. The first is defamation. And defamation is false statements that harm someone's reputation. They can be written or spoken. When they're written, they're known as libel. When you do oral defamation, it's considered slander. Now, the statement must be false. If you make a true statement, no matter how mean, it is not defamation. Next is false imprisonment. And so false imprisonment is the intentional restraint of someone else without reasonable cause and without consent. Now, this happens sometimes with shops, with shoplifting. If you are detained for 3 hours and you're chained to the counter in front of all the customers, that could be considered false imprisonment. But if you're just detained for 20 minutes in the security office, it's probably not false imprisonment. The next one is intentional infliction of emotional distress, also known as IIED. This is harm that results from extreme and outrageous conduct that causes serious emotional harm. Next, we have battery and assault. So they're related but not identical. Battery is the intentional touching of another person in a way that is harmful or offensive, whereas assault is an act that makes a person reasonably fear that a battery is imminent. And the last area that we'll talk about here is trespass, conversion, and fraud. So trespass is intentionally entering land that belongs to someone else or remaining on the land after being asked to leave. Conversion is when we take or use someone's personal property without consent, and fraud is injuring another person by deliberate deception. Next, let's talk about damages. So we have compensatory damages, which is money intended to restore a plaintiff to the position they were in before the injury. And we also have this principle called single recovery principle, which requires when a court is settling a matter to award a lump sum for all past and future expenses. That way, the plaintiff doesn't come back in a year and say, oh, by the way, there are more bills that you need to pay. The next kind of damages are punitive damages. These are intended to punish the defendant for conduct that is extreme and outrageous. Now, these are less common than the first kind of damages. And then we have tort reform. And so tort reform varies from state to state. But in many states, there's a distinguishing between economic damage and non-economic damage. Now let's talk about business torts. The first is tortious interference with business relations. The second is tortious interference with a contract. This exists if you can establish four elements: that there was a contract between a plaintiff and a third party, the defendant knew that there was a contract, the defendant improperly induced that third party to breach the contract with the plaintiff, and there was injury to the plaintiff. Another business tort is tortious interference with a prospective advantage. And this is just malicious interference with a developing economic relationship. And then the last area we should talk about is the Lanham Act. And so the Lanham Act provides broad protections against false statements intended to hurt another business. But in order to win, you must prove three things. Number one, that the defendants made false or misleading fact statements about the plaintiff's business. This could be a false comparative ad. The defendants used their statements